thinking about it. Hello, good evening, UK Crime Book Club, and welcome to our latest chat. And I'm delighted to be joined by Nicola Upson this evening, and also Betsy, her cat, who is making
I'm so sorry, she can't work out
a appearance.
It's lovely to be with you though, and lovely to see you again.
I'm just going to move my internet because sometimes it plays up a little bit. So thank you so much for joining us.
No, my pleasure, really.
Oh, are we still there? Yeah, we're still there.
Yeah.
So this evening we're going to be talking about your latest book in the Josephine Tey mysteries, which is called Shot with Crimson. And I was saying I've got the beautiful library finished copy, but I've also got the even beautifuler, the proof with the telltale sign of sort of Mandalay as it is in the book. So would you like to sort of tell us in your own words about Shot with Crimson and where we are in the series, because we're for the fans out there who are watching, they'll know where we are, but for people who haven't come across Josephine's books before.
Yeah, of course. Well, Shot with Crimson is the 11th book in the series, and the series features Josephine Tey, the real life wonderful mystery writer, as its lead character. And the book started in sort of the early to mid 1930s with a book called An Expert in Murder, which was set in the world of theatre, which was Tey's other career as a playwright. And they've moved gradually forward. I was going to move quicker through the series, but the 30s fascinated me the more that I found out about them. But as you come to this one, Shot with Crimson, we are just at the very, very beginning of the Second World War. So September 1939. And as you may guess from the cover, and particularly from the back cover as well, which I particularly love, you talked about Mandalay. The book has, as well as featuring Josephine, it owes an awful lot to Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, which is a book that I have loved for many, many years. But also to Alfred Hitchcock's version of Rebecca. Hitchcock, for those who have read all the books in the series, has appeared before. Because Josephine really did have one of her books, A Shilling for Candles, made into a film by him. So I imagined a meeting between them at Port Merion where they discussed that. But we've moved forward now. Hitchcock has left and gone to Hollywood, and we're about to start shooting Rebecca. So the novel really has two strands. It has an English strand with Archie Penrose, who's my serious detective, and a Hollywood strand. Josephine has gone over to be with her lover, Marta, who works for Alfred Hitchcock. And so those two strands run parallel, but of course there are connections between them, which become more and more interwoven as the book goes on.
Yeah, I mean they're real. I love that. So it's because in your other books that they're more sort of close together, aren't they? But this one I really enjoyed the sort of the two strands of the story, the American one, and also Archie sort of over here solving the crime that she's sort of. We won't give too much away because we don't want to give a lot away, but Josephine inadvertently becomes involved in a crime. Let's say that's pretty vague, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and just like she does in all the other 10 books as well. But it's interesting that you talk about the two different strands, because that difference in time, it created so many headaches in the writing of the book, because of course there's an 8-hour time difference between Archie in England and Josephine on the West Coast. And normally when I write these books that are set in the 30s, I'm always struck by how many parallels there are between the two different ages. You know, how almost there's no such thing as historical fiction, because the emotions are so similar and certain incidents are so similar. This one, it struck me how different they are, because of course you can't just pick up the phone and talk to somebody in America in 1939. You have to book a transatlantic call. You have to plan ahead. And us, when we can touch a device and we can speak to anybody anywhere in the world at any time of day, that's such an alien thing. So I had to get used to that, and that was one of the mechanics of the book.
It's interesting because some people say that they write historical fiction because of that sort of, I guess, luxury of the fact that you can't speak to someone immediately. It would be, you can't get on. I mean, you could get on a plane, I guess, but there wasn't many, and I imagine they were very, very expensive. So there's nothing. Whereas now, everything is so immediate, isn't it? You can be in America in 7-8 hours. You can, whereas she's on the boat for weeks.
It seemed to take,
but it's I really liked it, and I liked
it seemed to take her so long to get to Hollywood.
Yeah, definitely.
She sails on the Queen Mary, and I wanted, because I would have loved to have travelled on the Queen Mary. The luxury and the Art Deco beauty of that ship was absolutely extraordinary. And reading through all the different accounts of people who did, and looking at the archives with the pictures, was wonderful. So I wanted to create that luxury for her. But on the other hand, of course, because it's at the outbreak of war, the Queen Mary becomes a completely different thing. So you have that glorious contrast of this almost ridiculous luxury, but set against the fact that it leaves England as a luxury liner. And by the time it docks in New York, it's turned into a warship. I mean, they're doing blackout on the portholes, and it's gone on to full war alert. And literally, she is on the last crossing out of the last commercial crossing out of America, because after that, the boat docks in America and becomes something very different. So, and it's still glamorous. She bumps into Bob Hope on board, and then even when she gets to America, she's still got to cross America. So she gets on a train called the Super Chief, which was nicknamed the Train to the Stars because it ultimately it finished in Hollywood. And the luxury of that was absurd too. So she comes out of her compartment, and there's Clark Gable. So I wanted to create that kind of that sort of starstruck state, because although Josephine Tey in real life and the character was well connected in theatre and had lots of famous friends, even she is starstruck by the level of celebrity that she's going to encounter when she gets to Hollywood.
Yeah. I mean, I was really also fascinating. Your books are really well researched, and so you sort of feel like you really enter the period that you're in because of the research and because of the detail. And how long, so when you're writing your books, how long does the research part take of it, and what does that sort of entail for you?
It usually takes longer than the actual writing of the book, really. The thinking about what sort of book it's going to be, and developing the plot, and using all that background research, because there's the research on Josephine Tey's life, which is going on all the time. And then there's the research on the wider historical period and specifics for the plot. It was slightly different this time because early on, I couldn't go to Hollywood, because the time that I was researching the book in the early stages, when I needed to go to Hollywood, was still in the aftermath of COVID, when it was difficult to travel. So that was really hard for me. All my books, without exception, have started with something real about Josephine Tey's life or work, and a place that I love, or has ambushed me, or is particularly atmospheric, or I want to find out more about. So not being able to go and check out the actual location for the book was hard. And that's really where the research came up, because sometimes it pivots you into a completely different path. And that was very much the case in this, because apart from anything else, knowing that I wanted to write a murder mystery set around the filming of Rebecca, you don't, that's such an exciting, or it was for me, it was such an exciting idea that I didn't really think about the practicalities of it, because you can't rewrite history to that extent. You can't say Joan Fontaine is a suspect, or Laurence Olivier is bumped off in the film, in the early stages. So I needed another strand to the book, and it was while I was researching the book and Daphne du Maurier, the book Rebecca, that I found my key. Because spending a lot of time in Cornwall as I do, and knowing about du Maurier's close connection with that landscape down there, I had always assumed that Manderley, the house in Rebecca, was based exclusively on Menabilly in Cornwall, where du Maurier lived for years, and at the house she was obsessed with. But I found out when I started reading some of her letters that that wasn't the case at all. There was a bit of Menabili in there, but Manderley went back much earlier to her time as a child when she was about 10 or 11. And she went with her family to visit a stately home called Milton Hall in Cambridgeshire, which was just down the road from me, which felt like an absolute gift. And she went there in 1917, so towards the end of the First World War. And at the time, it was being used as a military hospital. And that dear old Milton, as she always called it, gave her the sense of that country house feel. And when she was sat down to write Rebecca, she walked through those rooms again to create the atmosphere of that. So because I've got fact and fiction in the books, I then thought that if that's true, if that's something that maybe not many people know, I certainly didn't know it, then it's not too much of a leap of imagination to think that that might have been, Milton Hall might have been where she first saw a housekeeper figure dressed in black,
Yeah.
who would later then go on to become the Danvers in Rebecca. So that really was the spur to the second part of the book. To imagine, the book starts with Daphne going back there going there for the first time as a child, and then 20 years later, when the hall is requisitioned again by the army, as it was in real life, something happens there that Daphne du Maurier's childhood memory has the clue to. So I invented almost a sort of the real woman who Mrs. Danvers might have been based on. I've created an identity for her and a family in the past that plays out in the 1939 present of the books. And then, as so often happens, it's really strange with these books. I read an interview with Daphne du Maurier's son, and he said that that indeed was at Milton Hall, the place where she first saw a Mrs. Danvers type figure. She met a
Really?
house.
Wow.
Yeah, she met a housekeeper there. And I don't know anything about the lady. I don't know what her name was. And I don't think Daphne du Maurier did either. And the woman who I've created in the book is by no means based on that real person. She's very different. It's funny how those things that you think you've made up come back to haunt you as being true. And actually, once you know that she saw Mrs. Danvers as a little girl, you can't read those brilliant passages in Rebecca again without seeing them through a child's eyes, because it's kind of fairy tale language, the skull-like face and the hollow eyes and the tall gaunt figure. It's like a child's view of a witch from a fairy tale. And so that all suddenly made sense when I realized what those origins of that character were.
I didn't read Rebecca until I was probably in my 30s, because I always thought Daphne du Maurier was a bit like Barbara Cartland. She just completely passed me by. And then I was working in a library and somebody did a display, a Daphne du Maurier display. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to take it home and read it. And now it is one of my favorite books. It is just amazing. And so I loved the connection between this and Rebecca. And the Rebecca, I'm also going to have to rewatch the film now, because it's really like made me want to watch it again now that I've read the book.
Yeah,
so are you a real fan of the film? Have you watched the film previously lots of times anyway?
Well, I'd seen it a sort of normal amount of times, I suppose. Now I've obviously seen it an abnormal amount of times, because we watched it an awful lot in researching the book. And I think Rebecca is quite unusual in that the novel is brilliant and stands on its own without any adaptation. But on the other hand, the film in its own right is brilliant too, and neither diminishes the other, which of course was completely different to her last experience, because the film that Hitch made before he left England was Jamaica Inn. And so he had immediately before Rebecca, he had filmed another of Daphne du Maurier's novels. And she had hated that film so much that she demanded that her name be taken off the titles. So I can only imagine how she must have felt. Yeah. I can only imagine how she must have felt when she learned that she'd sold the rights to Selznick International in Hollywood. And what happens? Alfred Hitchcock has hopped across the ocean and turned up to direct another one of her films. But I think he served her brilliantly. And I think that film, all the performances, we had an event on Shot with Crimson a couple of weeks ago, which included a screening of the film. And I'd never seen
Oh,
it in a
wow,
cinema
cool. That's
before.
really good.
It was, because I'd never seen it on the big screen before. It was a real
Yeah,
treat. And all those performances,
I saw that
without
it was on. I was looking for it, and
Go on.
there were so many. Oh, sorry, I was going to say that I was looking for it when I was reading the book. I was looking for it, and it is on YouTube now, so you can see it on there. But I mean, obviously, it's not the same as seeing in the cinema.
No, but it's
with the I found the inclusion of. Sorry, we're having a bit of a lag, I think.
we are a bit. You go first, and I'll shut up for a minute.
No, that's fine. No, you get. I was going to say the inclusion of the Hitchcocks was really fascinating, and I hadn't realised as well that he had done. He had sort of adapted one of her books, and that didn't go all that well, did it? From her point of view, is that sort of true, or is that fiction?
What, Jamaica Inn?
No, sorry, Josephine's book. Josephine's book.
Josephine's book. Sorry. Yes, and no, that is absolutely true. I mean, if you know A Shilling for Candles, which is Tay's second crime novel, and if you then watch Young and Innocent, it seems that there are very few connections between them. It's the basic storyline. He changes the killer. He almost sort of dispenses with Alan Grant completely. So it was great fun when I wrote Fear in the Sunlight to have a scene where Josephine goes to see that film from the first time, and her horror really at what he's done to her book. Although I do think that the more you watch it, the more Hitchcock has captured the essence of her book quite brilliantly. And of course, that's what he was so good at. He got to the absolute root of a work and then made his own creative thing from it. And so that was interesting for her, and I imagine that it was not something that she spoke of very fondly. But it was because including Hitchcock in a past book, some people didn't like him when they'd read that book. And obviously he's known for having a rather cruel sense of humor, for treating some of his female leads in not very respectful ways. But there's another side to him. And I like and admire Hitchcock tremendously. And part of the reason for that is for his family life. He was married to a woman called Alma Reville. And Alma Reville was senior in film to him when he first started. She did every job in cinema except starring and directing. And theirs was a hugely respectful, creative partnership. He readily acknowledged everything that Alma had taught him. In fact, when he got his Lifetime Achievement Award, so this is Stanley, who's just arrived to take part in the conversation. When he got his Lifetime Achievement Award, he thanked 4 people, and all of them were Alma Reville. So it was that side of him that I wanted to show. And when he went to Hollywood, he left his home behind in England, moved his family to a different continent. And he was just a normal family man. They found a good school for their daughter. They had a church around the corner. They had found somewhere to live. And he would drive around Hollywood making home movies, not the big film directing star, but just an ordinary person. And so it's that side of Hitchcock that I wanted to show in this book. And hopefully people will see that and realize that he's not just the big film director and the rather peculiar man who had a fixation with blondes. There's much, much more to him than that, and a more likable side.
Yeah, I think he when they sort of meet, when Josephine meets him, she is quite, she's quite anxious about meeting him, isn't she? Because she's got that, she had that history with him in the past. But now Marta is working with him, and so but she's still apprehensive about that sort of meeting again. And then there's that sort of incident on the boat, isn't there, on the way over on the ship, where she meets somebody whose father was in Jamaica in. And there's that story, isn't there? That Lee, she's called, isn't she? So,
Yes.
there's that story that sort of,
Yeah.
you don't really know where that's going to start with. So how did that sort of come about?
Well, I wanted to bring to life lots of the rumors that went round about Hitchcock, really, and lots of the things that were said about him, some of which were true and some weren't. And so that story is very, very, very loosely based on some rumors that were written when somebody wrote a biography of Hitchcock. And also, a bit later on in the book, there's a story where he's very upset because of the attitude that the film industry in Britain now has to him, because they blamed him for deserting them, really, basically. Of course, war is breaking out, and he's, as they see it, run away to America. And he's not doing his bit. There were some very cruel cartoons in the press, because the other film that Selznick was working on when he was working on Rebecca was Gone with the Wind. So there were these cruel cartoons in the newspapers picking on Hitchcock, saying "Gone with the Wind Up," basically calling him a coward, which was quite unfair because he did a lot of propaganda work for Britain. He didn't just go away and never go back and never do anything for the war effort. He did quite a lot of work, and he did go back to England. So all those things about how people view Hitchcock and what they make of him, I think, are quite interesting. So that all got thrown into the plot to kind of just show what a significant person he was when he got to Hollywood, and how that allowed him to make great films, which of course was the thing that was central to his professional life. But it also had its downsides as well. So that it's just a flash of the celebrity side of things, I suppose.
So it must take, like, because obviously you've got the sort of Rebecca story, you've got the Hitchcock story, you've got the Milton Hall story, with the characters that are involved in that part of the story. How did it sort of, when you sort of decided that you were going to write a book and sort of have Rebecca and Hitchcock as the sort of, main focus, how did those other people, was it the Milton Hall that brought James and Roberts and them into the story, or was it something else?
It was several different things. It's always really hard to explain how those things come about, because they're slightly different from book to book. And when I come out of a book and I've finished it, I often can't remember quite how they came to pass. But yeah, the Milton Hall, discovering that link was hugely significant. But also it was something that Hitchcock said, he was always the smartest person in the room. He said that Rebecca was essentially the story of a house. So thinking about that and thinking of the importance of Manderley in the book and the film. So I had the Milton Hall strand. That was fantastic. But I needed a way to bring in the Hollywood side of things that wasn't the celebrities, because all the wonderful gossip and bitching that went on in Rebecca's filming. I mean, Fontaine was cast so late. It seems incredible now, because it seems that only she could ever have played that part. But there was a lot of palaver going on around the casting, and Vivian Leigh desperately wanted the part and insisted on screen testing twice for it. One actress was so desperate to play Mrs. De Winter that she offered to do it for nothing. And Selznick, the producer, was a little bit smitten with Joan Fontaine. So it really was always going to be her. But the cast were really quite unpleasant to her. She was very young. She was about 21 when she made that. And she was newly married herself. So playing a newlywed on screen, but also having the uncertainty of that in her real personal life. Olivier wanted her replaced and made no secret of that. And she was trying to break into this clique of largely British actors that were the rest of the cast. So there's all that going on. But as I said before, I realized that I couldn't make that the nub of the plot. So I looked to the house, as Hitch had said, and I looked to how they filmed Manderley, which in itself was so interesting. The special effects, Selznick prided himself on the studio's special effects. I mean, when they're starting to film Rebecca, they'd only just finished burning down Atlanta for Gone with the Wind. And if you watch that film now, you watch it burning down, apparently, I haven't seen it lately, so I haven't checked, but apparently you can see the King Kong sets burning down in the background. But so the special effects fascinated me, I think, because I knew
Yeah.
absolutely nothing about it. And when you see Manderley on the screen in that film, you are never seeing a real building. They looked for ages, both in England and in America, to find the perfect location to film on, but they just couldn't find anything because they had to show it in its different stages, obviously, and they eventually would have to burn it down. And so they decided they would make Manderley themselves. So everything you see is filmed on one of 3 different miniatures. And miniatures is a nonsense term, really, because one of them was big enough to take up a whole soundstage. I mean, it's absolutely vast, but built to different scales that would allow Hitchcock to do different things with the filming. So when you see them first arrive, that's a different miniature from the one at the end, which is charred and burnt. And so really cleverly played with all that, and fascinating stuff, which, like I say, because it's so alien, it was really interesting. And that's really
Yeah.
where the character of James came from, because he's the connection between the two. James Bartholomew, he was an orderly at Milton Hall in 1917, and he bumped into Daphne while he was there. But he's incredibly skilled as a miniaturist, and so he ends up working for Hitchcock and moving across the to America with him. So he is the link between the two. But that all came about really from looking into the special effects side of the filming.
Yeah, that was it's so clever. I love it. I mean, how do you said like at the end you that sometimes you forget. So how do you track? Have you got like a way of tracking how you've written the last 11 books? Because obviously things happen and you want to remember. So how do you
God,
keep
no.
track of what she's done in her in
Oh, I see. No, I don't. I can't remember how I wrote any of the books, really. I mean, I can remember obviously the themes and the moments that really excited me, and gradually how the book came together. But the process is a complete blur to me, really. Looking back, it almost seems quite magical that there's a finished book at the end, and it still feels like that. But Josephine, I don't really need to keep track of her, because I suppose we've been together quite a long time now, and I do feel
Yeah.
I know the character really very well, and I know most of the time how she's going to respond to certain situations. There are always exciting times when I don't know how she's going to respond, and that's always an interesting turning point for a book. But no, I can remember that side of things,
Yeah.
and her personal life and her relationship with Marta and her friendship with Archie. That's always really vivid to me.
Yeah.
And so it's also the key
Mm.
into any new book, because the first third of a new book is always the hardest to write. Um, but the scenes with her and with Archie, I love writing Archie. There's something about him that makes him very easy for me to write. I always feel at home with him. So the early scenes with those two are
Yeah.
always encouraging for me, because they're my way into the book, as hopefully they are for the readers as well.
Yeah, I think there's something really nice about, I mean, and I haven't particularly read your books in like strict order. Don't tell my husband, because he has a thing about that, because he thinks you should read everything in strict order. but
That's very
but
funny.
I sort of dipped in and out, and so I've not ever had any problem in dipping in and out, because they're written in such a way that you don't have to read them from the beginning, do you? So you don't have to start at book
No,
one and
not at all. And it's brilliant to hear you say that, because obviously that is a concern when you're writing a series that
yeah,
becomes quite a long running series. It's what entry points people have, and how they work. But I think it's like you say, it's utterly dependent on what sort of person you are, whether you need to read a series in order or not.
Yeah.
And I would be certainly with Shot with Crimson, because of the Rebecca link, lots of people have come to it for that and are now going back and reading some of the others, which is brilliant. And also because the books they also have quite a separate identity, whether they're set, some people like the Suffolk books, the sort of quieter village type mystery books that are in the series. Some people like the big celebrity ones like this one or Fear in the Sunlight. So people tend to find their own way in somehow, depending on either
I
a
love The
location.
Dead of Winter.
Ah, St. Michael's Mount. That was a wonderful book.
Oh, such a good book. Loved it. And that has a celebrity sprinkling, doesn't it?
It certainly does. I don't think it's giving too much away to say that Josephine spends Christmas with Marlene in that. Marlene Dietrich.
Yeah.
Because it's set on St. Michael's Mount. And that book started slightly differently to the others in that it wasn't sparked necessarily by something real about Josephine, but it came about because I really wanted to sit down and write one of those golden age spirit Christmas mysteries, one of those ones that we all love to think we're going to have time to sit down with just before Christmas and read it at the perfect we never do. It just goes back on the shelf until next year. But so it really was a case of sitting down and thinking about what ingredients did I want in a Christmas mystery. And obviously there has to be snow. There has to be sparkle and glitz and glamour, which is where Marlene comes in. There has to be that kind of strong emotional pull, because I think we all feel things more intensely at Christmas sometimes, whether it's sadness over people who aren't here anymore or just the magic and the excitement of the season. Everything seems to be notched up a bit. Coming together as strangers or people who know each other a little bit and don't necessarily get on, that's always great for a crime novel. And most importantly, probably, well, there has to be a map at the start of the book for a proper golden age mystery.
Yeah.
But most importantly, there's that isolation. There's that, that there's going to be some, whether it's really cut off, whether it's through snow in an isolated country house, or in this case, because of the tides at St. Michael's Mount, they're going to be isolated, going back to the true Christie tradition of And Then There Were None, which is a book I so admire. So it was written in that spirit, not as high a body count as And Then There Were None, but very much that sense of fear. No, but that sense of fear and dread and just suspicion, really. And because it was set in Christmas 38, it's the last Christmas before the war, that sort of suspicion of the stranger and the looking at people differently was really fitted into the historical context as well as it's things play into your hand in a sort of almost magical way, because I wanted Marlene there because of the glamour and because of her status as an icon, really, and because of the fact that all the books have a bit of a wish fulfillment thing for Josephine, and she was a huge film fan. She would have loved to spend Christmas with Marlene, I think, watching from a distance. But then I found out that because of the fear of the Nazis and the war and the way that Dietrich felt about what was happening in her homeland and how devastated she was and how brave she was, she genuinely came up with a plot to assassinate Hitler at one point during the war. But researching her and seeing photographs of her doing war work, wearing a hairnet, serving food to the troops, again, it was like Hitchcock. There was a different side to the person we think we know. And so she fitted in very well there, particularly with the German, the real life historical German connection to that part of the world, because the German ambassador, von Ribbentrop, spent a lot of time in Cornwall. In fact, Hitler had promised St. Michael's Mount to him when Germany won the war.
Oh, really? Wow.
Invaded. So there's that sense of menace hanging over the whole book, which Marlene Dietrich felt very keenly in her real life. So to have that in the book was wonderful.
Yeah, because it's like there's some real twists in that one. I mean, there's lots of twists in your books anyway, but in that one I felt like I was like, who are they? And then it was like, well, who's that, and where did he come from, and what's he? Yeah, there's just so many. Yeah, it was so good. Such a great
Please,
book. Do you
that
have?
was the other thing I wanted to have in it was a proper golden age sleight of hand trick,
Yeah,
which
no, definitely. Yeah,
when you know what it is, it has to be so simple, but
yeah,
hopefully you rely on how you think people are going to react, people's psychology when they read that book, and hopefully you wrong foot them. So
yeah. You
I'm
definitely
pleased
did
it
me.
worked. Good.
And I love St Michael's Mount, and I just really could. I could just. Was really transported there. I guess that's so people who. People who have sort of got that connection. I think that's the other thing is the connections with your books is that so you've got like Port Merion, you've got St Michael's Mount, you've got so they're very most a lot of people will have a connection to them in some way, which I think makes them also much more personal. And is that something that you find it I think because you find them so personal when you're writing them and so involved that sort of passes over to the reader?
I hope so. Yeah, I do. I mean, the choice of location, I think, is a very selfish thing. It has to be somewhere that
Yeah,
either I go to and I'm ambushed by, like Port Merion. I went there originally because Josephine Tay went there in the 1930s. And it's always lovely to go somewhere that you know the real woman went. But I knew within half
yeah,
an hour of getting to Port Merion that I wanted to set a crime novel there. Because it's
yeah,
like its own film set. It's a playground for a killer. It's the ultimate locked room mystery. So they sometimes it's that. Sometimes it is the more personal books like the Suffolk ones, which like The Death of Lucy Kite and Dear Little Corpses, which are close to me personally because it's where I grew up, it's where my family are, it's a place I
mm,
still spend a lot of time in. So Josephine often, interestingly, now I think about it, is at her most vulnerable when I've given her a cottage in Suffolk, and she's sometimes at her most vulnerable emotionally when she's in those places. So that's another side to the books where the reader gets closer to her. And I suspect that's
yeah,
because that's more personal to me as well. So there's things like that. And then there are places that I'm going back to North Wales for the next book, which I know because of writing these books, and I love that about them. I really like the fact that they force you to get to know somewhere differently rather than just going on holiday somewhere and admiring a
yeah,
place. You have to get to under the skin of the place as well, and I like that's what happened in the Cornwall books early. When I wrote the first Cornwall set book, Angel with Two Faces, I was quite new to Cornwall. So again, that was a wonderful way for me to get closer to a place that ended up becoming really, really important to me. And
yeah,
the village that's based in, where we're now lucky enough to spend a lot of our time and have been for over 20 years now. They just so embraced that book. And
did they?
again, yeah, it was we had some friends of ours who run the hotel there. They had a launch for it in proper 1930s style. They did an
Oh
afternoon
wow,
proper tea party launch for the whole village. And everybody, all the elderly men who had helped with the research of the books, who had known obviously remembered their parents in the 1930s and what life was like in that village, they all came out on their Sunday best and celebrated that book. So that was a bit special.
oh
um
that's lovely, really
yeah,
lovely.
really nice. So yeah, I absolutely get what you're saying about people finding a connection in that way,
Mm.
because in a way the books help me connect with the places as well. It works both ways.
Is there anywhere that you'd like to take Josephine that you haven't taken her already? Is there anywhere that you'd like that like that you sort of
Well,
think I'd like to go there, but I'm not sure how to?
rather selfishly, I'd like her to go back to Hollywood because so we could actually have the chance of going.
To go.
But I think she's had enough of that life for a bit, so I don't think she'll be going there. No, I don't think there is a particular place. I'm really excited about going back to North Wales because there's a strong wartime connection there that I can't talk too much about at the moment because I don't know how it's going to work out in the book. But it was a place I loved, and it's lovely to see, because Portmeirion is glorious, but it is unique. And so it's nice to go back to that beautiful North Wales landscape just outside of Portmeirion as well, and get to know that a bit better. But no, I tell you what is exciting though, is that the thought of that she can go anywhere, really. Obviously, in the wartime years, those travel restrictions are going to have to be respected. But it is great to have, and I think that's why we as readers like exploring places through books as well. I think it's fantastic to have that choice and that opportunity.
I love North Wales, so I can't wait. I spent, when my kids were young, we went on holiday there a lot, and we went to Anglesey a couple of years ago, and yeah, I really love North Wales, so I can't wait to see what she gets up to up there.
This book is going to have quite a strong theatre link as well, which I haven't, because obviously that was so important to her throughout her life. Real Josephine Tay, Gordon Davier, which was her playwriting pseudonym. So it'll be lovely to reintroduce that back into the series, because it's a huge love of mine as well. So those two things, those two strands, I'm very excited about.
I loved it when as we, I don't think it's giving away too much, but Daphne sort of is involved in the book later on as well, and she talks about what she's doing, and one of the characters in her play which is a real thing that she did, and she had Margaret Rutherford in it, who I love in the Agatha Christie sort of, they're not Agatha Christie, but they are sort of Agatha. I love her. She's just amazing. She's just so, but I was like, oh, I couldn't see her. Yeah.
No, everybody is so, because if I'm doing an event, I often ask people to guess who played Mrs. Danvers in the first stage. And actually one person has guessed Margaret Rutherford. And if you Google the production, I brought it forward a bit, but it went on in 1940, and Du Maurier adapted it from her own book. But if you Google that stage version, you see pictures of Margaret Rutherford as Mrs. Danvers. And she just is the absolute epitome of those paragraphs that Du Maurier wrote, that description. And she was, by all accounts, absolutely brilliant when she was allowed to act against type. And Du Maurier herself said that Margaret Rutherford really made an effort to get under the skin of the character of Mrs. Danvers and try to understand, not just play her as a monster, but try to understand all the different emotions that were bubbling away there under the surface to make her behave in the way that she does.
Because I thought that was really interesting with the character in your book that is sort of linked with Mrs. Danvers, was what is going on under the surface. There's a lot going on.
There is a lot going on.
You definitely won't be bored with her. She's definitely, but really interesting, because I loved the way that you did it. Really, it's really gradual. It's not like you don't sort of immediately, I mean, I wouldn't say she's immediately likable, but what comes later is shocking, So I'm not going to give any more away than that, but but did you always know who was, when you sort of started and you're going to have your crime, did you always know who that was going to be? Did you know who your murder victim was going to be? No.
I knew who the murder victim was going to be, but I didn't know who the murderer was. I had two main contenders until very, very late in the book. And the first part of the book was Open House, and then as the plot became more focused and tighter, it narrowed down to two, and then obviously to the one I chose.
Yeah, which I love. I do love a curveball, because I think I'm not saying any more because I don't want to give anything away, but it's really hard, doing books about crime, because you don't want to give it away for people who haven't read it, but also when you're doing the chat and you want to know more about it, it's like we'll have to talk about that afterwards.
Yeah. No, and I am notoriously bad. I'm very capable of giving my own plots away, so I have to literally button it.
Do you? This is going to be like asking, which is your favorite cat? Do you have a favorite of the 11? Is there one that really sort of not maybe necessarily your favorite, but is there one that sort of has a really sort of special place in your heart, really?
I think I've always been very close to the death of Lucy Kite because it's set in Suffolk and it goes back to the first crime story I ever heard. So there's a lot of my childhood and growing up and seeing things differently and wanting to write things in a different way that went into that book. And also it's the only book I've ever written entirely from Josephine's point of view, which was a really lovely thing to do, actually. In fact, now I'm saying that, I don't know why I haven't done it again. But so that was one of the things. And again, Dear Little Corpses, Suffolk. I love those two books. And I suppose I'm quite proud of 9 Lessons because I think that's a proper crime novel. I know that sounds a bit silly. 9 Lessons and the Dead of Winter are proper crime novels. Some of the books are more about Josephine and they're gentler and they're about different sorts of crimes that maybe are more emotional and psychological. So things like The Death of Lucy Knight and Sorry for the Dead, they're very much character driven. Whereas The Dead of Winter and 9 Lessons are plot driven. And it's nice to know that occasionally that's something that you can pull out of the bag, I suppose.
So obviously, apart from Josephine, do you have a favorite? I guess I want to say crime author, but it doesn't have to be crime author. Do you have a favorite apart from Josephine, obviously, who you obviously is a favorite?
I owe a huge debt to PD James, I think, both personally as a friend, but also as a writer. I think the beauty of her writing and the way she evokes a sense of place are hugely influential for me. I've learnt an awful lot from them, and I've also learnt a lot from just watching her and seeing how she works and behaves with her publisher and her fans and her readers. She was an extraordinary woman, and so yeah, I would have to say definitely PD James. But it's interesting you asked that because I just I'm in the final throes of curating an exhibition of crime fiction, of 20th century British crime fiction, which will run at Cambridge. It will run at Cambridge University Library from March to August next year. And they have the most extraordinary collection of first editions. I've been like a kid in a sweet shop for the last months because they were all housed in the tower, basically at the UL. It sounds almost as draconian as it is, but because people didn't think they'd ever be requested or read, so they've got all these wonderful first editions of the century. And now they've got an exhibition in their own right. So I think that just shows a lot about how far crime fiction has come. But there were some real joys in, obviously I had to read quite a bit of crime fiction. It was a tough thing to do. But there were some real they're like C.S. Forester's Payment Deferred and Ruth Rendell's Judgment in Stone. And then I got to reread some of my favorites like Christiana Brand's Green for Danger or The Moving Toy Shop by Edmund Crispin. So lots of those beautiful so-called golden age classics that somehow buck the trend and do something really memorable. So that's been a real treat. So yeah, there's lots of one-off books that are in my mind at the moment.
That sounds amazing. God, there's going to be a lot of people who are watching this who are going to be like, I need to know when that is. So me included, because that sounds amazing. I love first editions and I love golden age crime. So I'm like, okay, right, where let's get the map out and have a look where.
Brilliant. No, well, it opens on the
And
23rd of March.
that must 23rd of March. Okay, right. 23rd of March is in the calendar. We'll be looking that up as when we finish. When you started, when you wrote your, the first Josephine Tay, did you ever imagine you'd be talking about book 12, which is, was that always your plan, or was it just a plan to? Did you always plan to have a series, or was it a one-off to start with and then it just grew?
Yeah, I always planned to have a series. And when the books did get picked up, and it was a while, there were lots of rejections before they got picked up. I had a contract for 3, so I knew there would be 3. And I always knew that there was so much that was interesting and fascinating and rich about her and her work, that if people liked them, and if I did it okay, that there would be plenty of material. So I always dreamt that there would be a book 12, and dare I even say it, maybe a book 13. So I knew that there was plenty of Tay to go round, and the books are not even at that glorious period just after the war where she starts to write her best work. We've got all that to come, the Franchise Affair and Brat Farrar and Miss Pym and the Daughter of Time. All that is still ahead of us. So I had faith
so you could write another 11.
Yeah, I could. There's certainly enough material if people keep enjoying them. No, and there's certainly no danger at the moment of me running out of steam with her, or getting bored with her and the world that she moves in, because I'm still fascinated by that. And although I've done other books, I've done a standalone that isn't a crime novel, and there are more books like that I want to do. There's nothing that I've wanted to explore as a writer that I couldn't do through a crime novel, and that I couldn't do through a Josephine crime novel so far. So I'm hopeful that will continue.
Oh, so are we, definitely. So you write about one a year, don't you? So that's sort of roughly what
they take a bit longer now. One every 18 months to 2. Yeah, it's 18 months since the last one came out.
It feels shorter than that, actually. It doesn't feel like, I think probably when you're waiting for them to come out, the time goes quite quickly. Probably when you're writing them, it doesn't go, it goes really quickly.
It absolutely flies by. I think it's my age. I think I've got to that stage now where I seriously can't believe that we're starting to think about putting Christmas decorations up again, because it only seems that we've just taken them down again. So no, I think
I know.
Time does go so quickly.
It does. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been absolutely fascinating to talk to you, and I know that I've wanted to chat to you for ages, so it's been a real pleasure of mine. I can be a little bit fangirly because it's been absolutely amazing to chat to you. So I'm going to show you. So Shot in Crimson is out now, and if you like a good crime and you love du Maurier, and you like Hitchcock, and there's so many things that if you like in this book that you can pick it up and go with it. So I can definitely recommend it. And thank you, Nicola, for joining us. Thank you, because we've gone on to the new stream system tonight, and it's actually been okay. It's been a bit laggy every now and again, but apart from that, we've managed to do the full hour, so I'm quite impressed. So thank you for bearing with us on that as well. So
no, not at all.
Yeah, thank you for everybody for joining us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I hope that is it Stanley and Betsy can go out now.
They're fast asleep now here. They've had their moment of fame.
And they are fast asleep.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nicola.
Lovely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.